Okay, good evening. This is the first time that the Berlin Corona Investigative Committee is being broadcast internationally. Lots of things are going on in the legal arena. That's why we're going to be talking to a number of attorneys from all over the world. One of them is Dr. Angelo Giorgiani from Italy. We have Dr. Renate Holzeisen from Italy. She just filed yesterday the annulment complaint against the EU Commission. But there are other people who will also have a word to say in this. We're going to start out right now with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. from Children's Health Defense. Can you hear us, Robert?
I can, and I apologize for being late. I'm hopping around on a new hit, so.
Sorry to hear that. But you're not late. We were late, so everything is quite as usual. How's the situation in the United States as far as the corona crisis is concerned?
Well, it's really difficult to tell. I mean, the question is about we have very, very little idea about the efficacy or the safety of the vaccines. And that appears at this point to be the principal and kind of the only solution. So there's not much attention being paid to therapeutic drugs, and there appears to be a lot of promise in new therapies, new protocols for caring for patients, and off-the-shelf, patent-expired drugs that doctors are having tremendous success with, reducing infection fatality rates below the rates of seasonal flu, which I think is a very important target for us. The vaccines, this morning, Bill Gates went on TV and said that they now believe that 2 shots of the vaccine will not be sufficient, that they're going to need 3 shots, and that after that, we're going to have a lot of boosters. And so the goalposts keep on moving. And, I think the problem is we're not getting good data. And this is important for people in Germany and elsewhere to understand, because we're dealing with experimental vaccines that were not adequately tested. The vaccines that we're using in the United States do not have FDA approval. They are experimental vaccines. They were allowed under emergency use authorization, which means we do not know the risk profile for those products. If we want to know, the only way those products could be killing thousands or hundreds of thousands of people, we will never know it because we do not have a surveillance system that is functional. The surveillance system we have in the United States, according to HHS's own study, captures fewer than 1% of vaccine injuries. And so let me explain to people in Germany what you should expect from your health officials and what you should demand from your health officials. And this is the only way that we can understand whether a vaccine is actually averting more problems than it's causing. And here's the essential thing. You need to know, and every health official in Germany should know what the background death rate is for elderly people, for people between 70 and 80, and for people between 80 and 90. What is the background level for death? And for example, in the United States, people between 65 and 74 years old have a death rate of 4.9 per 100,000 per day. So in that age cohort, we can expect, with all other things being the same, that in our country, 4.9 people between 65 and 75 years old will die every day for every 100,000 people in our population. That's a very important number, because then you want to compare that number with the death rate following vaccination. So everybody who dies in Germany or the United States within 2 months of taking a vaccine, that death needs to be scrupulously recorded. It doesn't matter whether the coroner said it had nothing to do with the vaccine. It doesn't matter if the doctor said it had nothing to do with the vaccine. You need to know that number, because there's no way from examining a body you can tell whether the vaccine killed that person, or whether it was vascular collapse, or whether it was a stroke or a seizure or a heart attack or myocardial infection or blood clots. There's no fingerprint. The only way to make a determination about whether the vaccine is safe is by doing the body count. I was saying anybody who dies within 2 months of getting that vaccine, we need to know the day and the time of their death. You should really do it for 6 months. And then you take that number and you compare it to the background rate. And you say, are we killing? Are people dying from this vaccine at a greater rate? Are people between 65 and 74 years old dying after they get this vaccine at a higher rate than the background rate, which is 4.9 people per 100,000? And if they are dying more often, then you have a problem with the vaccine. But if your health officials do not know the answer to that question, they are committing malpractice. And we all need to know the answer to that question, and we all need to be scrutinizing the surveillance systems that allow us to make sure that we are capturing every death and every injury following vaccination. Now, I think one of the reasons that we're here today, I'm hoping, is to view a video. And the video was a video that we initially heard about during an interview with the Corona Investigation Committee, where somebody from a whistleblower from a nursing home in Germany reported some atrocities that were occurring in that nursing home in conjunction with the administration of vaccines. We later were approached by whistleblowers who gave us copies of a film that confirmed the dialogue and the report that we heard in that committee meeting. And if we are technically proficient, which I hope, I'm not going to guarantee it, we will be able to play that film for you now. And I don't know who here is in charge of it, but we gave you guys a copy of we have a longer version of this film that goes almost 40 minutes. But we're going to play for you right now a 4-minute version of the film, which shows some of the highlights. So can we try to roll that film?
In the meantime, I'll quickly translate for the German viewers. Robert Kennedy sagte, wir müssen genau darauf achten, weil wir nicht wissen, wie gefährlich das die Vakzine sind, die in Wirklichkeit keine sind, sondern genetische Experimente. Wir müssen genau darauf achten, ob die Sterblichkeit in der älteren Altersgruppe, die zuerst geimpft wird, plötzlich höher ist, als sie es vorher gewesen ist. Und das sollten wir möglichst 6 Monate beobachten und dann feststellen, ob die Sterblichkeit höher ist. Wenn sie höher ist, dann bedeutet das, dass diese genetischen Experimente, diese Injections nicht sicher sind. Über die Wirksamkeit wissen wir nicht genug, aber erst recht wissen wir gar nichts über die Sicherheit, weil keine entsprechenden Trials gemacht wurden. Are we ready to roll this?
Das ist irgendwas auf dem Bildschirm, dann müssen wir hier irgendwas machen?
Robert? Müssen wir was machen?
Spielen wir ihn ab oder Kennedy?
Er spielt ihn ab.
Er spielt ihn ab. Bobby, can you start the video?
This is Mary.
Hi, Mary.
I don't have the 4-minute version, but I think we've sent it to you, Reiner.
Okay, then we'll play
Okay, then
it.
we
That's
play
all
it.
right. Thank you,
Yeah,
Mary.
thank you.
Könnt ihr das spielen?
Okay.
Okay, it'll start in 2 seconds. Okay, so we're back. This is a clip that we never expected to see. Viviane and I spoke with the whistleblowers from that nursing home, and they explained to us that out of 31 people, these are all people who are suffering from dementia. Out of 31 people who were vaccinated, 8 died within 2 or 3 weeks. 11 more suffer from serious side effects, serious adverse effects, and they explained to us how how all of them had tested negative before they were vaccinated, before they were given the injections, and how they were all in good shape, apart from the fact, of course, that they were suffering from dementia. One of them is a runner in his late 70s, I think, or was a runner, I should say, who was also an opera singer. He outran one of the nurses who was in her mid-30s. He was still singing operas on the day that he got vaccinated. After he got vaccinated, a couple of days later, he died. So this opera singer doesn't sing anymore. This video clip is horrific. The thing that's most disturbing about this is because we are getting more and more calls from other whistleblowers from other nursing homes in this country. Plus, we're getting information from other countries, Sweden, for example, Norway, for example, Gibraltar, for example. There are also incidents in England and in the United States that match these descriptions. It may not be as bad as it is in this particular nursing home in every single incident, but it's bad enough. it means that people are dying because of the vaccines. Of course, we're going to have to go and look into the details. We're going to have autopsies performed. But what we're seeing in this video clip is worse than anything we ever expected. And if that is true, and if this is representative for what's going on in the other nursing homes and in other countries, then we have a very serious problem. And so do the people who make the vaccines, so do the people who administer the vaccines, for various reasons. But it looks more and more as though we're dealing with homicide, maybe even murder. We're going to have to look into the details. Robert, have you seen the clip? Robert, can you hear us?
Bobby, unmute.
I think you're on mute.
Take the microphone. You're mute. Left down.
Can you hear it? Yeah, I can hear you.
Now we can hear you.
So, what do you think of this video? Is there anything that you have learned in the United States that sounds like there's stuff like this going on in the United States as well?
Well, we are getting many, many reports, as you say, from all over the world, and including the United States. In New York and other parts of the United States, of mass deaths in elderly care and nursing home facilities following vaccination, and strange reports also of populations that were uninfected that tested negative for COVID, and then following the vaccination, they actually tested positive. And in many cases, their deaths are declared as COVID deaths, which is odd, and we don't understand it, and I don't pretend to understand it, but all I can tell you is we're getting many, many reports in the countries that you mentioned, including Belgium and Spain, which I don't think you did mention, but also in the Eastern European countries and all over the United States. We're seeing large scale reports of deaths from nursing homes following vaccination.
We got another call last night from another whistleblower, Viviane and I did another interview with her, and from a completely different care home. This is a nurse who worked first on a corona ward in a general hospital, and she just couldn't take what she was seeing there. She wasn't able to cope with that. So she tells us that in that nursing home, after vaccinations, a number of people died or fell seriously ill. She was trying to alert the doctors to what she saw and make them act on it, but nobody really wanted to act on it, because most of the personnel, the staff in that hospital, that's how she explained it to us, were in panic mode and are all afraid of speaking out. Finally, she couldn't take it anymore, because in one instance, there was one patient who was dying, and she was in her late 80s, and she described how the doctors, because there's financial incentives involved, how the doctors were still trying to test her. And they tested and tested, taking the swab, poking in her nose, until while she was dying, and still she started to bleed. That's when she couldn't take it anymore. She left that workplace, and because she thought this is a better work environment, she started to work for a nursing home. And she says, at first it was nice to work there, nice to work with the people, the staff was nice. And then they started vaccinating. Same thing all over again. People started to die. Well, we asked her, how do the relatives of the people who are dying, how do they react? And she says in most cases, they don't react. They don't want to look into this because they simply believe what they're being told, that this is a COVID death. Now, we have to take into consideration that that actually makes sense because all of these relatives only know the individual their individual loved one. They don't know the general situation. So only if you know what's really going on, if you have the whole picture, and I think the only people who do are the staff who work there, then you realize that there's something seriously ill. Well, we asked her, why doesn't the staff do something? Same answer again. They're all afraid. Only very, very few are willing to take a stand and to speak out. However, we're lucky because we, as the Corona Committee, through this whistleblower tool, we're getting more and more people to speak out, even though we have to distort their voices because, of course, they're all afraid to lose their jobs, and at times we can't show their faces. But it looks as though this is a general phenomenon, even though we don't know any of the details, and there's a lot of research that will have to be done, probably all over the world. It looks as though there's something seriously wrong with these, let me say, injections rather than vaccinations. Do you know of any cases in the United States where maybe the DA is looking into such incidents, or is the same story happening in the United States and people don't want to mess with this?
It's the same story in the United States. And probably the worst malpractice. Everybody's frightened. Nobody is willing to challenge the orthodoxy. And the worst malpractice is happening among the American media, which punishes and censors people who report vaccine injuries. If you report a vaccine injury at Facebook, your posting will be taken down and you will be deplatformed. I was deplatformed from Instagram this week. And I never and they said because I told falsehoods about COVID, but I never had a single falsehood. Every single posting that we put on Instagram was sourced to a public government database or to a peer-reviewed publication. Nobody can show me a single false statement that I made on Instagram. But if you criticize the orthodoxy, you will be silenced, you will be demoted, you will be punished. And the people in the press know that, and the press just doesn't report it. They report it the way that they're told to report it, which is these are COVID deaths, these are normal, and don't worry about it. And so there's no scrutiny of this enterprise. All of the institutions that democracy has erected to protect vulnerable children from large corporations and from overreaching by government have been dismantled. The lawyers can't sue in the United States. The regulatory agencies are captured, are an arm of the industry. And the press is also captured. And of course, the frontline medical doctors are punished if they report vaccine injury.
I'll quickly translate this. Also ich habe ihn gefragt, ob die Situation da in den USA genauso ist wie hier. Er sagt exakt genau die gleiche Situation. Diejenigen, die darüber berichten wollen, werden dafür quasi bestraft von den Social Media, die dann das entsprechende Video mit der entsprechenden Information runternehmen. Er selbst ist gerade Opfer einer solchen Aktion geworden. Sein Instagram-Account wurde gelöscht, obwohl er nie in irgendeiner Weise was Falsches berichtet hat. Aber allein die Tatsache, dass man nicht auf Regierungslinie ist, reicht aus. Das haben wir hier auch. The only good thing about this is that all of these Well, inefficiencies that have been around for probably 20 or 30 years are now coming out into the open, and more people are beginning to understand that there's something seriously wrong. That's the case in this country, and that's the case in the United States as well, as far as I can see, because there are these alternative media outlets who more and more people turn to get real information. We spoke with Professor Schwab, who is a professor at the University of Bielefeld here, and he explains to us that one of them, just like you said, one of the worst causes of this crisis are, of course, the mainstream media, because they appear to be fully in the hands of the orthodoxy, as you phrased it, fully in the hands of the government, and don't seem to be able to even try to give us.
I think we shouldn't use the chat function here because it might be visible on screen.
Okay. Yeah, let's not use the chat function because it might be visible on screen. We don't think so, but we're not sure. And there's too many people listening in on us. What we're going to do in this country is we have one tiny little advantage, because our mainstream media consists of the national public radio system, which is being subsidized. I shouldn't say subsidized, but every citizen in this, every household in this country has to pay a fee for being able to watch public television and listen to public radio. However, in return, they're supposed to give us real information and real education. They don't do that anymore. They haven't done this for a year. So what we're going to do is a group of lawyers are ready to reclaim what was paid over the last 12 months, because over the last 12 months there's been nothing but propaganda. And many people, probably millions of people who have always been kind of fed up with this official broadcasting or public broadcasting system, will stop making any further payments, and we're going to be using this money to set up an entire new media landscape, which hopefully will consist of people and organizations that will give us real information. You've had this for a long time in the United States. The alternative media have been very active for a long time, and in my view, they're much more active there than they are here. But still, it appears that the majority of the people, and I'm talking in particular about people who are like in their 70s or 80, who have gotten used to and who believe in the system, who just probably cannot even bear the thought that there's something wrong with the system, with the orthodoxy, that this part of the population is still trusting the mainstream media. Is that so?
The public in the United States generally trusts the mainstream media. And in truth, Reiner, we do not have an active, well, we used to have a liberal media in our country like Huffington Post, Daily Beast, Salon, Slate, Politico, that were something of an antidote to the corporate takeover of American democracy, but those outlets are now completely co-opted. So you will not see any major outlet other than the ones we publish, which is the Defender, that challenge the official orthodoxies. Nobody is publishing the truth. Everybody has stepped in line.
Our friend Professor Schwab today said, and he has parents who are in their mid or late 80s, and they desperately wanted to get vaccinated, and they did. He was quite upset about that. Thus far, nothing's gone wrong, or at least nothing appears to have gone wrong. But he says now that he's seeing the full picture, that he doesn't believe anything anymore. That is being published by the mainstream media. He doesn't believe the picture that they're painting about Russia or the United States. Nothing of the orthodoxy is credible, he says. So he has, and we all should make up our own minds by taking in as much much information as we can, and then decide what part of the story makes sense and what part doesn't. The whistleblowers who have been talking to us and the whistleblowers who still want to talk to us, I think it's courageous of them to come forward and explain what's going on. But on the other hand, of course, they are under a lot of pressure because they can't come out with their real names, their real faces, and their real voices because they too are afraid of losing their jobs. As far as the vaccination or the injection is concerned, at least here in Germany, that was a red line, and that still is a red line for many, many people, including those who are in line with the government, because many of these people, maybe even a silent majority, has become quite critical, and they've started to ask questions. And many of them have said, okay, I'm going to go along with the mask, I'm going to go along with social distancing, but I'm not going to get vaccinated. Is that the same kind of stance that people take in the US?
Mais la compréhension à l'audition n'est pas mon point fort. Qu'est-ce que j'ai fait? Par contre, compréhension à la lecture, ça je l'ai.
Isa, you have to go on mute.
Answer that. The United States is divided. Democrats are generally very, very, and I'm a Democrat, are very supportive of the vaccine and are flocking to get the vaccine. I think 70 or 80% of them are say that they intend to get vaccinated. Republicans, I think 40% of Republicans support the vaccine. So I don't know. We'll see what happens. The problem is we're not getting any. There is no way to gauge safety because we do not have a surveillance system. So all of these injuries are invisible, and the press isn't reporting them.
Yeah, the same thing's going on here. Even though we have a so-called sentinel system, it doesn't seem to function anymore. You mentioned the Defender. The last piece that you wrote in the Defender made quite a splash because it was very informative as far as Bill Gates is concerned. I'm not sure if that video is part of that Defender article, but there is a video in which Bill Gates says, and I think you're alluding to this in your article, in which he says that the profits that he's making from investing in the vaccine industry are beyond anything that he's ever been able to make as a profit with Microsoft. Now, tonight, this very same Bill Gates is going to appear on public television here in Germany on one of the most important talk shows, and he's going to explain how he is becoming a poor man because he's losing all this money that he has invested for philanthropical purposes, that he has invested in the vaccine industry. What is the truth?
Well, the truth is that I don't think you can say that he's made more money on vaccines than he's made from Microsoft. I can tell you kind of some of the details that we know about his financing. He is today the biggest vaccine producer in the world. He's the third or fourth richest man in the world. His net worth is $133 million. And he's done very well from the pandemic. So the lockdown has created enormous wealth for him. His wealth has increased by $22 billion since the beginning of the lockdown. And the same is true of Mark Zuckerberg, Jeffrey Bezos, Michael Bloomberg, and and Sergey Brin, who runs Google. The company, while the middle class across Europe and the United States is being obliterated, and people are being forced into poverty. The social media and the big data titans are raking in cash, and these are the very people who are enforcing the censorship against criticism of the lockdown over which they are profiteering.
Meine Frage war, Robert Kennedy hat einen Artikel geschrieben in der Zeitschrift The Defender, und in diesem Artikel, sehr lang, hat er sehr ausführlich über Bill Gates berichtet, auch darüber, dass Bill Gates mit seinen Aktivitäten viel Geld verdient. Ich hatte ein Video gesehen, das ist aber nicht in seinem Artikel erschienen und da wird er auch nicht in Bezug genommen, aber ich hatte ein Video gesehen, in dem Bill Gates erklärt, dass die Profite von den Investments in die Impfindustrie größer sind als alles, was er mit Microsoft je verdient hat. Aber Robert Kennedy sagt, kann er so nicht sagen, aber er verdient jedenfalls sehr viel Geld, denn durch die Krise, die jetzige Krise, sind all diejenigen, die auch mit ihrem Geld die Mainstream-Media unter Kontrolle haben, ein ganz großes Stück, und zwar im zweistelligen Milliardenbereich reicher geworden. Das gilt für Bill Gates, das gilt für Sergey Brin, das ist der Mann von Google, das gilt natürlich für Mark Zuckerberg, der ist von Facebook, und das gilt natürlich auch für Jeff Bezos, der Chef von Amazon. Are people worried about this because or are they not aware of the fact that some people are making huge profits from this crisis while everyone else is suffering badly?
I don't think most Americans are aware of it because the newspapers won't cover anything that is negative about the lockdowns or about the countermeasures. The only thing that you hear from the press in our country are things that support government policies, and they censor what they call vaccine misinformation. But that term is a euphemism that means anything that departs from the official government proclamations. It does, whether it's true or not. It is censored if it disagrees with the government, so most Americans are not hearing these.
Now, the odd thing, I shouldn't say funny thing, but the odd thing is that this very same thing is going on, not just in the United States, not just here in Germany, but all over the world, which does seem to point at some kind of shall I say, lockstep or plan behind this, because it cannot be a coincidence, at least not in my mind as an attorney, as a lawyer, it cannot be a coincidence that this is going on worldwide. Now, we know that the people who we're just talking about, the people who are profiting from this crisis, have so much money that they also, of course, have invested it in the so-called mainstream media. But isn't anybody worried about the fact that the notion of free speech, that the idea of free speech as the very basis for any functioning democracy is now in the hands of private corporations who have never been elected by anyone?
Yeah, there's a lot of us who are very worried about that. And, we're litigating on that issue, but it's a very, very difficult problem. Mm-hmm. I mean, we're not, we no longer, one of the problems that we have in the United States that you don't have in Europe is that in 1997, we changed the law in our country to allow pharmaceutical companies to do direct-to-consumer advertising on television. Mm-hmm. So today, the big television networks can make up to 70% of their revenues on pharmaceutical products. And what it means is that pharmaceutical companies are dictating the content of what we see on the news. Oh, there's no disagreement with anything that is pharmaceutical on the news because those CNN, ABC, NBC, Fox are all making their money, the bulk of their money. Anderson Cooper gets $12 million a year, and about 10 million of that comes from pharmaceutical companies. And then for Fox News, which is kind of the opposition, Rupert Murdoch, who runs Fox News, also owns the biggest vaccine company in Australia. And so, you have the press in our country that has been absolutely taken over by the pharmaceutical industry, and that's really, I think, a very, very big problem for American democracy.
Also die Tatsache, dass die Mainstream-Medien und auch insbesondere die Social-Medien in der Hand von Privaten ist ein großes Problem, nicht nur hier, sondern auch in den USA, weltweit, weil die jetzt plötzlich in der Lage sind zu diktieren, wie weit Meinungsfreiheit geht. Welche Meinung darf geäußert werden, welche darf nicht geäußert werden. Das Ganze hat auch was damit zu tun, dass ein uramerikanisches Problem sich auswirkt, weil nämlich aufgrund einer Gesetzesänderung in den 90ern inzwischen die Rundfunkstationen 70% ihres Einkommens über pharmazeutische Produkte, über Werbung für pharmazeutische Produkte machen können. Und das wirkt sich auch in der Berichterstattung aus. Es gibt einen berühmten Sprecher, der heißt Anderson Cooper auf CNN, der kriegt $12 Millionen im Jahr. 10 Millionen davon kommt aus der pharmazeutischen Industrie. Es wirkt sich aber auch auf der anderen Seite aus. Das war die liberale Seite, jetzt zur konservativen Seite. Das ist Fox News. Das gehört Rupert Murdoch, einem ursprünglich aus Australien stammenden Menschen. Und der ist gleichzeitig der Eigentümer eines der größten australischen Pharmaunternehmens. Also es wirkt sich auf allen Ebenen aus. This problem seems so big and the resulting damage seems so horrendous all over the world that many of us have been thinking that maybe the national courts will not be able to cope with this. So the idea has been floating, and we've been discussing this with a number of our colleagues from all over the world, that maybe we're going to need, once we get this to stop, we're going to need, in order to go and deliver justice, we're going to need something like a Nuremberg trial, second generation. Is that something that people in lawyers that you work with have also been thinking about?
Yeah, Reiner, I don't want to depress you, but there has been so much infiltration of the international institutions that we rely on for that kind of governance, particularly by Bill Gates and by Davos and by the big financial the World Bank, the World Economic Forum, and then all of Bill Gates's quasi-governmental agencies like Gavi and PATH and CEPI, and it seems that it would be difficult to get fair treatment in those kind of forums, and of course then there's jurisdictional problems. The United States doesn't really recognize the jurisdiction of those kind of forums anyway. And I think, we're going to have to figure this out. I think what we need to do, we need to try to figure out ways, first of all, of communicating to the public. So we're off of social media. The mainstream press is now captured by the pharmaceutical industry, but there are now other evolving ways for people who are learning to communicate to each other in other ways, and we need to do that. We need to establish credible ways that, that people who care about democracy, who care about civil rights, who are concerned about the ascendancy of the medical cartel, to begin really revolting against the increase in unacceptable power of those power centers. And one of those ways is through communication. The other is in many of our independent nations, there are opportunities in the courts, where you still have integrity in the court and the judicial system of some of our countries. It's getting smaller and smaller and more constricted, but I think those present the best opportunities, really, public organizing, public communication, and use of the courts.
And I think it also makes sense that what we've been doing for months now, CHD and us as the Corona Committee, plus others from all over the world, Renate Holzeisen from Italy, I think it also makes a lot of sense for all of us to continue to cooperate and share the evidence that we have so that we're all on the same page and that we're all on the same level, meaning that because the problem is universal and it's almost identical worldwide, so that we're going to be able to use judgments from, for example, Germany. There's a recent great decision by a judge in Weimar, or a decision which I've just learned about. We're going to learn more about this sometime later tonight. There's a great decision from Uruguay. There's this PCR test decision from Portugal. I think it's really important that we cooperate closely and share the evidence that we have in order to show to the rest of the world that this is not just a bunch of people who are working isolated from each other, but that we are a force. As lawyers, we're just part of the whole thing. Of course, the education, the transparency thing, the communication, of course, with the rest of the public is just as important. But I think it's really important to show the world that, as you said, those parts of the judicial system that still have integrity are still functioning, and that we, you and I, and the rest of the people who are working with us are doing the best we can to show and to get as many decisions as possible from the courts of law that say PCR tests cannot tell you anything about infections, and that there are no asymptomatic infections, and even if there were, it doesn't play a role. As many of these decisions as possible, because the PCR test, the Dresden PCR test, was and still is the centerpiece of this whole thing. If we destroy that narrative, I think this house of cards is going to come down crashing soon. Okay. Is there anything that we have missed that we still need to talk about? Is there any piece of information that you think is important for the public to know, which I didn't think of?
Wer ist jetzt angesprochen, die Allgemeinheit oder der?
Nee, Robert, did you hear that?
No.
Oh, I said, is there?
I could go on for a couple of days talking about
We know that.
keeping my lips shut.
But I was wondering, is there something that you think is important for the rest of the world to know, which we haven't spoken about yet?
No, I mean, there's a lot, as you know, Ryder,
Yeah, of
but
course.
I think you did a good job of covering it.
Okay,
Do
great.
you have a lawyers association in the United States too, which is critical or something like that?
Yeah, our organization, the Children's Health Defense, and Mary Holland, who's one of our attorneys, is on here, and we have attorneys in Europe as well. We have many attorneys in the United States, and we are involved in a lot of litigation. We're suing Facebook at the moment, and I don't know. We're suing Facebook for censoring us, but Facebook has a right to censor people. If Facebook is a private company. If they don't like what you say, they can throw you off. But in our case, what we argue is that the government instructed them to censor us. Adam Schiff, who's the head of the Intelligence Committee, told them to censor all vaccine misinformation. And Facebook has said that it is coordinating its censorship with CDC and with WHO and with the US State Department. And in our country, private companies can censor you, but the government is not allowed to censor you. And what our argument in our court case against Facebook says you are acting as a government surrogate. So you are censoring us because the government told you to censor us and because they don't like our political speech. And that's a violation of the First Amendment.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, that's one of the approaches we're bringing. But we have many, many, many lawsuits right now.
Mm-hmm. We have filed a lawsuit against Google/YouTube for the very same reason here in Germany. However, we have an advantage because our Constitution, our basic rights, the first 20 articles of the German Constitution, also apply, even though indirectly, to private corporations. So that'll be helpful in this country. Plus, the European Union, when it was still functioning a couple of years ago, passed a privacy law that is a little bit more protective of the general population than the laws that you have in the United States. Let me just translate that. Also, das Wichtigste ist immer noch die Kommunikation mit der Öffentlichkeit. Wir müssen auf glaubwürdige Weise mit der Öffentlichkeit kommunizieren können und dazu werden gerade eigene Kommunikationskanäle aufgebaut, damit wir nicht mehr auf die Mainstreams, aber auch nicht auf die unter Kontrolle befindlichen Alternative Media zurückkommen und damit wir nicht immer nur die Meldungen hören, die sich der pharmazeutischen Industrie anpassen. Robert Kennedy sagte, CHD hat zum Beispiel eine Klage gegen Facebook laufen, weil die auch natürlich Meldungen, die nicht im orthodoxen Mainstream sind, löschen, genauso wie hier. Wir haben eine Klage gegen Google, YouTube laufen. There's another complaint in New York, a PCR test complaint. Is there a result as far as the first part of the complaint is concerned? I think there was a injunction. Do you know anything about what the situation is, Mary?
I can speak to that if you'd like. Yes.
Yeah, please.
Yeah. So the court, we applied for a preliminary injunction against New York City that was requiring all children to have PCR tests or they could not participate in school learning. Mm-hmm. That case is still pending, but interestingly, yesterday, New York State Department of Education issued a guidance document, a letter saying that no school could require testing on a mandatory basis in any school in the state or for any school activity. We don't believe that guidance would have been given without the lawsuit, but we are not going to withdraw the claim before the court. We want the court to decide that that is the law before we do anything else.
Well, that's excellent news. That's the case that Ray Flores argued, right?
Yes, exactly. You inspired us, Rainer.
And he's inspiring us now. That's great. I'm going to explain this to our viewers. Also, es gibt eine PCR-Testklage, die von einem Anwalt vom CHD, das ist Ray Flores, in das Gericht gebracht wurde, der das vor Wochen schon auch verhandelt hat. Ein Eilantrag ist dabei, eine Motion für eine Preliminary Injunction. Und da warten wir schon seit Wochen auf die Entscheidung auf diesen Eilantrag. Und gerade sagt Mary Holland, dass es da eine interessante Entwicklung gegeben hat. Denn jetzt das ist eine Klage wegen Schulschließung beziehungsweise wegen der Anordnung, dass keiner zur Schule gehen darf, der nicht getestet ist. Und nun ist eine Guideline rausgekommen, also eine Empfehlung des Staates New York, glaube ich, oder der Stadt New York, ich habe es nicht genau verstanden, ich glaube der Stadt New York, und danach kann man kein Mandatory Testing mehr verlangen von den Schülern. Aber Mary, es wäre sicherlich nicht passiert ohne diese Klage. Aber Mary sagt, sie wird jetzt nicht die Klage zurückziehen, beziehungsweise CHD wird nicht die Klage zurückziehen, sondern sie wollen eine Entscheidung haben, damit auch gerichtlich genau das festgestellt wird, dass es nämlich keine Basis für die Pflicht zur Testung geben kann. So I assume since this happened yesterday, Ray is probably still celebrating, but I think it's great. You're going to keep on, you're going to ask for a decision in this case.
Yeah, we just today wrote to the court to say it's not a moot issue. It could come back unless the court comes to a decision. So we're still waiting, and we emphasize to the court that it's not moot.
Excellent. Great. That is really good news. Best news of the day. Okay. Still, if there's nothing else that we need to cover as far as the special situation in the United States is concerned, I'm just going to let you go because I know you're really busy, and I'm really, really grateful for both of you to take this time and talk to us. Okay.
Look forward to continuing to cooperate with all of you.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Mary. Thank you very much, Robert. Okay. Ja, jetzt der Kollege Beneda ist jetzt im Livestream. Herr Kollege, was gibt es denn aus Österreich Neues zu berichten? Wir hatten immer den Eindruck, dass Österreich ganz weit vorne ist und dass in Österreich die Justiz jedenfalls besser funktioniert als hier.
Ja, ich darf mich vorstellen, mein Name ist Rechtsanwalt Gerold Beneda, Gründungsmitglied der Rechtsanwälte für Grundrechte Österreich und dem ACO Austria, das ist ein außerparlamentarischen Grunduntersuchungsausschuss.